So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on Aboriginal land. I'm on the Wurundjeri land of the Kulin Nation here in Melbourne. I'd like to acknowledge elders past and present, elders from other cultures and emerging Aboriginal leadership, and say how grateful I am to be on land, and to acknowledge that this land was never ceded. And it is indeed Aboriginal land. So welcome today to our Return to Work performance in our Home Care Forum. As you can see, there's quite significant interest in this forum, and we have quite a lot of people online. Apologies for the administrative needs at the front of the meeting. Just shows how raw things are, and it would have, these things are always different when you're running them online, and I'm sure that you in your own worlds experience those things every day. So note today's forum is a collaboration between the Centre and WorkSafe, and it's part of our work program to support the out-of-home care sector and its workforce. And Shane Medcraft just talked about the wonderful world of Zoom. Indeed it is. My name is Deb Sabaris. I'm the CEO of the Centre for Excellence in Child and Family Welfare, and I have a wonderful team around me here today. Emma Femby, I know Emily Mellon is also online, and Emma Chua. So there's a beautiful team behind this work that we're putting on today. Just in terms of housekeeping, the presentations from today will be sent to you following the forum. If you have questions, please put them in the chat function, and try and sort of respect each other. If we do ask you to ask a question, one person at a time. If we can't respond to you today, we will come back to you after the forum. Now, we hope to be able to do that, but we do find that some of the questions are quite complex and need a bit of deliberation on before we come back to you. But we will definitely do that. There is a 2-minute survey which we'll send after the event. This will help us improve how we do things, both in terms of content and logistics. We do like getting evaluations of our work. It just helps us know where to gear our thinking next time around. Now what I'd like to do is introduce Josie McMahon, the Program Officer Health Practice from WorkSafe, who is a wonderful friend and colleague, and really one of our team in many ways. I mean, you could hear her making sure that everybody was having their needs met at the head of this Zoom meeting. Josephine, you're wonderful to work with. We enjoy the partnership that we have with you, your energy and enthusiasm about this issue, and we are really proud to call you a friend and colleague. And I'm going to hand over to you to take us through the next phases of this meeting.
Well, thank you very much for that lovely introduction, Deb. And may I say, I feel the same way. So I do feel as though we've created quite a formidable team with Emma and Ollie and everyone that we've been working with, which has been just lovely. So, and I'm really excited to welcome everybody today. It's wonderful to actually have a partnership with the Centre, but I'd also like to really welcome the agents who have made their way into the forum today. And we've got a couple of them speaking as well later on, which will be fantastic. The guys from the Return to Work team who have been fantastic to work with. So Steve and Chris, welcome, and I hope that people utilise all of your knowledge and skills and ask you lots of questions today, as well as our union representatives as well from ASU. So it's quite a great group of people that have come together today with lots of subject matter expertise. So I just wanted to, this is a brief look at the agenda, which I won't go through given that we've started a little bit late. So if we can just go through to the next slide, please, Ollie. So I just wanted to give a brief overview of what the forum is all about. So as you can see there, it aims to support understanding and facilitate improvement specifically in return to work performance in this sector. So we want to present a picture of where return to work performance sits across the sector, not just in relation to healthcare and social assistance, the social assistance industry overall, also in relation to the schemes within WorkSafe, which is all industries. So Steve is going to run through that in a moment with you. We want to facilitate discussion and shared learnings from agents and peers working across the sector. So your input and discussion today is really important and very valuable to us. We'll be capturing all that rich information and that discussion from the breakout rooms, and we'll be putting that together and sending that out to everybody later. And we also want to show you what the free offerings from WorkSafe look like to assist employers in their return to work frameworks, in the development of those, and in supporting workers to get back to work and keeping a sustainable, healthy workforce. So I'll talk a little bit to that at the end of the forum. Just to note that this forum aligns with our strategy for the healthcare and social assistance industry, which you can have a look online. I've just put the link up there. And needless to say, the out-of-home care sector is one of our key priorities within the industry that WorkSafe is working on at the moment to support you. So I think now, without further ado, if we can move on, and I'm going to introduce you to Steve Petridis, who is our Strategic Program Lead in the Return to Work team, to take you through some very important data. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, yes, thanks, Josie. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Yeah, today, look, I'm conscious of the fact that some of the people in the meeting may not be aware of how we measure return to work performance across the scheme. So today I'm going to cover off a little bit about return to work performance, as Josie pointed out, within the out-of-home care sector in particular. I'm also going to talk briefly about premium as well. So I just wanted to put a caveat in there. I'm no premium expert, but I'm definitely happy to take any questions on notice and work through those at a later stage. So before we dive into the data, I'm going to provide you with just a summarised explanation of how the 6-month return to work measure works. As some of you may be aware, this is a key WorkSafe metric. It provides us with a pretty good insight in terms of how well we are supporting injured workers to return back to safe and sustainable work. The measure itself is a measure of return to work performance based on the proportion of workers working 6 months after their claim was received by the agent. So, and as we all know, mental injury claim numbers are on the rise. People are staying on weekly benefits for longer. There's some of the facts before us. Therefore, we don't just look at the overall return to work rate at 6 months, but we also split that by physical and mental injuries to give us a better understanding of some of the key drivers that might be feeding into that overall return to work performance. Measuring return to work isn't just limited to 6 months. We also look at it at 1 year and 2 years. And the data I'm about to take you through now, so some of the charts, it is performance at the end of February 2021. And what this represents is claims received between 1 July 2019 and 30 June 2020.
I don't know what's happened. I haven't been able to get hold of him. Sue's still trying.
So in order for the population to fully develop, we've allowed a 2-month lag at the end of that as well. And that covers any processing delays and also to ensure that the return to work is sustainable.
I've got to do these slides. Can I call you back?
Okay, could we just flip over to the next slide? Okay, so just wanted to note there that so the out-of-home care sector includes all workplaces for the larger providers of residential care services. So we now understand and appreciate that we may not have covered every single provider within the industry, but we've certainly captured the majority. And as you can see there on that slide, the overall performance, so we're just focusing on the grey line for out-of-home care sector. And when we compare that to Feb 20, it has come down significantly, sitting at 62.22. The scheme at the moment is sitting at just over 69. And traditionally or historically, the scheme has performed at above 70%. So due to the major COVID impact throughout the last year or so, that has dragged the scheme back a little bit. Yeah, historically it does sit at over 70, around 72. And the healthcare and social assistance, just for another comparison point, that's the blue line, is sitting currently at 74. So as you can see there, this is a 6-month return to work performance across all injuries. And you can see the healthcare and social assistance is sitting way above where the out-of-home care sector line is. As I indicated earlier, mental injuries are definitely on the rise, and this is going to continue to be a challenge for the scheme as a whole, and in particular your industry. So, yeah, and we understand that employers have their own unique challenges, and what we want to aim for today is to explore, identify and share ideas that will help the industry as a whole get on top of this unique challenge. So as you can see there with mental injuries, again, it's telling us a very, very similar story. So again, although it's ahead of scheme and healthcare and social assistance, definitely come down significantly from where it was in the prior year. And again, a similar story on physical injuries. So we've got, in this case here, across physical injuries specifically for out-of-home care sector, that's come down to 70, just over 71. The scheme sitting at 73, and the healthcare and social assistance segment is above 80. So hopefully this has given you a bit of an overview in terms of how you're performing in relation to the 6-month return to work measure. And as I said, look, I'm happy to take questions after the forum and work through those with individual employers, as Chris and I have done in the past. And of course, we'll be taking a closer look at some of the scheme support services that are available that you can access through your agent in order to help you, support you in your approach to return to work and any early intervention models that you may have already in place. Now I'm going to jump over to premium. So next slide, thank you very much. So the employer performance rate. Now, some of you may be aware of the term employer performance rate, or EPR. You may have spoken to your agent in the past about this. This chart basically has de-identified employers. So as you can see, we've just labelled them A, B, C, and so on. These are the biggest providers, as I mentioned earlier, not necessarily all of those that provide the specific services we're talking about today. The EPR is used as an indicator of how an employer may be performing against their industry. So it compares claims experience of the individual employer back to that of the claims experience in the industry. So that's a very basic explanation of EPR. Essentially, anything above the 100% means that there may be some performance or claims management concerns, and that you're performing, if you're at 100% essentially, where that red line is, you're performing in line with your industry. So as you can see, I think it's around 11 out of the 17 employers that we're showing there are performing worse than industry. So it's around 65% of those employers are performing worse than the industry, and some up at around 2 or 3 times worse than the industry rate. Okay, so the work cover classification code, or WIC, which you may have talked to your agent about as well, this captures the key activities relevant to this sector. So what we've got here is the industry rate that lines up with that, and the industry rate accounts for essentially 5 years worth of claims experience and divides that by remuneration. Again, this is a very basic explanation, and it's it is far more complicated than that with the premium formula. And as you can see in the slide there, the industry rate for the out-of-home care sector is almost 4 times worse than the scheme average rate. And of course, this will have quite a significant multiplying effect on your premium dollar. So just something to be conscious of. And this is something, as I said, it is claims experience over a 5-year period. So, you know, having good performance over 1 year isn't going to fix this. It needs to be sustained over quite a lengthy period of time in order for, and that means all employees within that industry coming together and really nailing that down and improving the performance or the claims experience. So that's essentially it in terms of the return to work and premiums, premium slides that I'm presenting today. So as I mentioned, Chris and I are happy to meet with individual employers, you know, outside of this forum to dive deeper into their you know, individual performance. And I'll hand back over to Josie.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was very comprehensive. I'm sure that there's an awful lot of people sitting there going, wow, that's a lot of information to take on board. As Emma mentioned, we will be sending these slides out. So if you have questions afterwards, we've got our contact details at the end of the slide pack as well. I know that Steve and Chris Lyons, who's also a return to work expert who is here with us today, are more than happy to speak to you individually and directly around your organisation and how they're performing as well. Has anyone got any questions now that they'd like to raise? Okay, well, we might move on. So next up we have Robin Miller. I'm not sure who knows Robin in the room. Robin is the CEO of McKillop Services, Family Services, and we're very, very privileged to have her here today. Robin's a social worker and family therapist. She's got over 30 years experience in the child and welfare sector. So extremely experienced, and she's very passionate about social justice and the rights of children and families. Robin's also committed to training and supportive supervision for colleagues to provide best practice to the children and families we serve. She'll share with us today McKillop Family Services Return to Work Framework and the work that they're doing in this space. So Robin, I'll hand over to you and thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks very much, Josephine. I'll just check that everyone can hear me.
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you. I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and pay my respect to Aboriginal people, to elders past, elders present, and to the children. And I'm actually coming from Grafton up here, so we meet from all different parts of Australia today, and this is focusing on Victoria. But if I've learnt anything, I've learnt that this issue of OVA is not confined to Victoria. It's absolutely an issue that's internationally recognised and something that I've been passionate about for many years. So if we go, I think Emma's working the slides. So Em, if we go to the next slide, I don't for a minute want to minimise the human cost here. We're talking about people's lives. I feel very connected to our staff. Very long time ago, I worked in residential care myself. I have 2 kids of my own, grown up, who've become psychologists, and 2 of my, I've got 5 children, but 2 of them did psychology. One was a residential carer. You know, so it's personal, and I feel very connected to our staff. And I spent nearly 9 years as chief practitioner for DHS so across the state, and felt very connected to the whole sector. And particularly the young people in residential care are the most disadvantaged, I would argue, in our state. And the people looking after them are critical to their recovery. And I would walk across hot coals for residential carers because they are extraordinary people. And so I've put up here some, direct cases that McKillop have experienced. A sort of stock photo, of course. But we know the PTSD, the physical harm, but the mental injuries are the as you see, the striking increase. I'm going to go to the next slide, which actually looks at some of the data that the centre has collected in order to get this together. And right at this point, I want to commend the Centre for Excellence and Deb and Emma and the team and WorkSafe for actually focusing on this. Many of us have agitated for a long time. So forming this community of practice, which is how I see it, putting our good heads together is what we absolutely need to affect change. But you can see here, they looked at the top 4 CSOs and the data, and you know, the average was 1,800 per CSO, which is, you know, in that year up to March 2020. We know residential care is a high-risk industry in that sense. We, you know, as our earlier speakers have said, the workers' comp claims are serious. And we know that we're actually looking at a more complex picture now with the young people in residential care than even 5 years ago. So I remember giving evidence to Ombudsman inquiries and the Auditor General inquiry that was published, public knowledge, in 2014. And we talked then about the complexity of the kids and the matching that was the problem, and the poverty of options in terms of residential care, that we only had 4-bedroom units and we needed to have some much more capacity to have a range of responses, 2-bed, single bed units. And we all have, you know, cried out for a long time, including people within the department, very strongly about the need to stop this sort of merry-go-round about contingencies and actually plan ahead for the growth, because that's what we're facing with. The demand outstrips the supply, and the need to have more capacity and more clinically informed practice. Next slide, please. What I've done here was sort of overnight, actually. I was trying to say, well, really, I'm trained as a family therapist and psychosocial worker. So, you know, I think systemically. So systems theory talks about transactional patterns. So if we go to the pattern on the left, what we're talking about in OVA, occupational violence and aggression, 90% of our OVA at MacKillop is from our residential care. Okay, so we're dealing with kids who are traumatised. The facts are in on that. They're stuck. The limbic system in these kids is raging to survive. Freeze, fight, flight response, you know, is the default position. Their response to things impacts on the staff and on the young people. Let's not forget that, because other kids are triggered by the violence or aggression of other young people in the home. It's not just staff. Then we have how we respond as an organisation. And those arrows, if I could have got them going the other way, and I want to thank Lizzie Callanan and Belinda Cowie and Edith Locke for helping me with this presentation, but I couldn't get the arrows. The arrows would be, you'd have little triangles going both ways, because it's a circle that goes both ways. But leading off from the CSO organisational response, and, you know, all the agencies have fantastic people trying their best to do something about this and love the kids and want to do well with the kids. And, you know, we know kids in Resi, it's less than 5% of the total out-of-home care. Most of our young people in care are in kinship care in Victoria, a much smaller proportion, under 20%, in foster care. And many of the young people in residential care have had up to, you know, 56 placements. Yeah, we've had 2 children with 56 placements. How they were not psychotic, I don't know. Most of them have had over 6 placements. So instability is the absolute history of these kids before they come into any one of our agencies. But the organisational response, if you can take your eye to the right-hand side and that other transactional pattern I've got there, at the moment there's an incident, a critical incident. We have SIMS report. So it's child protection, placement coordination unit, often police, WorkSafe. Then we also engage with mental health, education, NDIS, children's court orders, youth justice. The family of the kids are informed, and this interactional pattern is bouncing off each other. Now, this can become an incredibly vicious cycle, and what we have to do as a system is interrupt and make a virtuous cycle. So it takes a very concerted effort and a lot of commitment to do that. And it's great news that we're actually starting to share our data and starting to learn from one another about what is working in each of our individual patches. So the next slide goes on to some of the situation at MacKillop. So we had in that year, in the data that I just put up before, where there was 7,200 across the top 4 agencies, 1,034 of those were ours at MacKillop. And I seriously lose sleep over these. That represented about 14% of the total incidents across the 4 largest. So it was lower, but you know, we haven't compared enough data. We've got to cleanse the data. There's still a lot of work to do in this. And this project, I hope, will enable us to have a much clearer picture of what, you know, that we're comparing apples and apples. We did have 32 claims in work cover claims in 2019, and that's gone up to 40. And that's in line with the industry average. So we're in the same boat as everyone else. If we look at WorkSafe visits to MacKillop, 2018 and earlier on, these numbers were higher. There were more PIN notices, as we call them. So we had 44 visits and 7 PINs in that year, 18 to 19. 19 to 20, we had 24 visits from WorkSafe, no PIN notices. 20 to 21, so far to the end of December, no PIN notices. So I'm going to talk about the huge effort because we have been blitzing it, but you know, the blitz has been on for 4 years and we're not there yet. We have 41 residential homes, that's 38 and 3 contingencies, but they're very carefully planned. We could, you know, triple, quadruple the number of contingencies. We say no a lot, sadly, because there is such desperate need from Child Protection, and the Children's Court make an order and they're screaming down the phone at Child Protection and PCU to find a placement, find a bed. So, you know, there is huge pressure on the system to help these kids, and funded agencies, of course, are expected, you know, and we have 127 beds currently. Next slide. What I did in my PhD research was actually look at what made a difference in the best interest case practice model. Many of you will know about that, which really brought in that trauma-informed, family-centred, child-focused practice. You know, we started this journey early 2000s. 2008 was the first time we published that. You know, we sent out specialist practice resources. So we did a whole lot around understanding what drives the behaviour of kids. And then I tried to get on the balcony in my research and look at what was it that made aspects of that reform, in fact, very successful. And believe it or not, Victoria has been seen internationally as quite outstanding in the way that the systemic change around the earlier intervention and prevention, that is the family services networks, were set up. So we're talking here the Family Services Alliance, and the centre played a big part in that. The department really led it. It was very strong leadership from, you know, people like Jill Callister, Aguirre, Chris Esquini, Kim Peake. There was, you know, Mick Norton, you know, sing out to many people operationally who on the ground said, we've got to do it differently. We've got to get in earlier. We've got to get help. We've got to join up the agencies and form networks rather than silos. So I looked at what made a difference in that reform leadership. You know, what I came up with were these 7 C's. Collaborative leadership is right up there. Yeah, you cannot have, you know, one heroic leader. You've got to have it on the ground up leadership. And I always say at MacKillop that our most important leaders are those doing night duty that night, those out looking for kids in cars, you know, those picking up the phone, our after hours, our people in residential care, yeah, our family services, our frontline workers, our MST workers, etc. So the leadership has to, our workers on the ground have to be empowered and use that creative energy, that greater intelligence that can respond in the moment, integrating their theory, the training, their lived experience and their knowledge and relationship with this particular kid in order to diffuse him so he doesn't chuck the bottle of water at you or at another kid. Leadership. Cannot stress enough the importance of it in any social work context. Commitment. Can I drive this one home? We had to hold our nerve. Nothing goes in a straight line. You know, we have glitches. Every agency has things where you think, oh my Lord, what am I doing? You know, we're not doing enough with. So everybody, you have to hold your nerve. We can do this. We can make a difference. Critical reflection. What is the research telling us? How do we critically reflect on the data? Are we collecting the right data? Are we analysing it? Are we thinking about what it means? Are we being creative in then trying to do something different in order to interrupt those stuck patterns and stop the vicious cycle where you get somebody who's been assaulted in a particular house who then goes on leave, and then somebody else is anxious and the kids smell anxiety, they pick it up, the kids are more anxious, so they start fighting. And within a week, you can have a bushfire, you know, you can have this vicious cycle. And a previously well-functioning home can absolutely, all of a sudden, they're short on staff, so we have to get agency staff, we get casuals, or we get people that kids don't know, and that just exacerbates it. Because what we know from the research literature in terms of what works is, in fact, the quality of the relationship that professionals and carers form with, and our carers are our most professional, let me tell you, form with the child and the child's family. Okay, it's all about relationship-based practice. That's what works, regardless of the model. And there's meta-analyses I can give you if you want it. Look at other papers, but the evidence is in on that. So we have to have models of practice that are congruent around relationship-based practice and understanding trauma, and that kids are stuck in this fight-flight, but they also need firm boundaries. That trauma-informed practice doesn't mean that there's no consequences, yeah? But we don't have punitive practice. We need a coherent message. We need people in every supervisor on the ground, you know, shadowing, supporting the new carer in the residential home on their first shift. They need to be giving the same coherent message as what I'm giving as a CEO, or as what the training room is given. We need champions everywhere. You've got to have champions, you know, on the ground, in the agency, and we've got to form a community of practice and stop throwing grenades at each other. Yeah, this community of practice is what I'm excited about today, because I think today's a really good example of it. And it's a really good example of what I call critical reflection. Next slide talks about then the Royal Commission. So after 9 years as Chief Practitioner, where I was working with all the agencies and inside the department and the Minister's Office and Ombudsman and Auditor General and all of those things I was exposed to, and trying to influence practice across all of these different spaces to improve, my key message was very simple. How do I get the key learnings from research and theory into practice, into frontline practice? So we actually walk the talk, you know? So I got an opportunity to work at the Royal Commission, and my particular brief was to be a consultant on contemporary practice and on out-of-home care. I spent 18 months in Sydney doing this work. It was a unique experience to look at all the different states and all the different systems. These recommendations were the result of that work and the work of many others at the Royal Commission. But look at that bottom third point. All residential care staff should be provided with regular training and professional supervision by appropriately qualified clinicians. Recommendation 12.19. I'll give you a minute to read that slide. I can't stand it in presentations when people read slides. I don't want to give you death by PowerPoint. So just read that. You know, we talked about the importance of intensive therapeutic models, strategies that increase likelihood of safety and stability, the importance of support and training for carers. So our next slide goes to who are the kids. So what I started at MacKillop when I came in was, of course, consulting, because that's my love. I love the work with the practitioners and the kids, and also we had real issues in residential care and very serious problems around occupational violence, and also the behaviours of the kids, many missing from placement, sexual exploitation. You know theoretically, but what we started to do with the help of Edith and a whole team of us getting going, and all the operational directors, etc., we started to get stuck into much more rigorous planning around each of the young people, and then this notion of critical reflection, That's what Outcomes 100 was. So we have panels where we have prepared very strong and detailed data on each of the kids, pulling together all their history. And we've come up with this very accurate data set. So have a look. This is our first 100 kids. I think we're up to about 160 now. I'm up in Grafton where we're doing all the New South Wales kids, and we're continuing to keep doing this process because our staff on the ground have really told us how helpful it's been. But if you look at it, 87% have suffered significant family violence. All have experienced multiple forms of abuse: physical, sexual, neglect, emotional, psychological. 88% physical abuse. Yeah, the family violence we should probably call partner violence or other forms of family violence, but they've been hit and tortured themselves, a number of them. 48% documented experiences of sexual abuse. That was intrafamilial or while they were in their family. That we also have a figure of around 43% that have, since before this placement, that before they came to MacKillop, had been exposed to sexual exploitation whilst in care. 80% have a diagnosed significant mental health issue, right? This is not just people saying, oh, they're a bit depressed. They've got a diagnosis. 60% history of drug and alcohol misuse, and 55 had self-harmed or attempted suicide. Now, we wonder why exposure to mental stress factors is the most common work cover claim. I don't wonder. If you're working with kids with this sort of anxiety and pain that they are carrying, it is no accident that they are acting out. And witnessing kids who internalise and just want to avoid everything and are just have, you know, almost giving up on life itself is incredibly impactful for our carers. So I know we needed to do more. What the next slide goes to is what MacKillop had started in 2012. And I was part of bringing the sanctuary model to Victoria in 2008 when I was in the department, because I could see it was a very adaptable model across a whole range of different contexts. And it wasn't rigid, you know, it was actually an organisational change model. And full credit to Michaela Cronin, who picked that up and actually embedded it in inside MacKillop from 2012. I didn't get to MacKillop till August 2016. So it's really all about safety, all about understanding trauma. So the whole agency at MacKillop now for, you know, we're on our 8th year, has been absolutely committed to this. We train everybody, whether they're the maintenance people or the finance, back of house, fleet. And actually these people are all, you know, they're paying the bills or doing the property repairs. They see the outcomes of staff who've been hurt. So it has a toolbox, but the key thing for each staff member is a self-care plan, right? And a safety plan. The safety plan being, what am I going to do in the heat of the moment to self-regulate? How do I calm myself down so I can think and all the blood isn't draining from my brain because I'm stuck in a fight-flight response? Whew, how do I slow it down so I can be thoughtful and actually creative in the moment, then use my voice to diffuse? Next slide. So that's something at MacKillop that's been really important in terms of decreasing. What we did, even though everybody knows, you know, 30 to 40% only of the residential care beds in Victoria are funded at what we call therapeutic level, right? Most aren't. Now, the overarching finding from the Outcomes 100, and it's what I've known all along, is that there is no difference in the kids from those who are placed in therapeutic versus those who are placed in the non-therapeutically funded resis. And, you know, many of us have agitated for a long time for that funding to be equal and that funding to be fair. So we know we've got a problem there, right? But remember when I came to MacKillop, I'd come from the Royal Commission and saying every residential carer should have access to clinical supervision. So talked to the board, said we cannot, if you dare to do this work, it's the most high risk area, we should be employing more clinically trained people to support teams in every house. And that's what we've done. Took a couple of years to build it up, but for the last, you know, 2.5, 3 years, this is what we've got. Where we work towards, and what's their role? It's all about promoting that child safe culture, professionalism, ethical practice. a much greater sense of accountability, that continuous practice improvement, that clinical supervision is a group supervision where, you know, we sit around and think, what are we feeling about what we're doing, and what do we think about what we should do differently? How do we improve? It's all about what can we do differently? The clinicians actually do pick up early warning signs of vicarious trauma. We're doing a group process now where we're teaching every carer around a self-regulation strategy, stabilisation techniques. Family connection is the other big change. We have really trained everybody in family engagement skills, because the kids will frequently kick off because they are so much in pain about the separation from their family. Cultural connection, double exclamation mark. Connection to culture. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kids and kids from other cultures, every other culture, need to feel proud and connected. We had to lift up our game here. And that picking up on early carer distress is also what we have charged the principal practice and indeed all of our operational people with. Next slide. Some of the things that we learn in the reflective practice is, you know, really trying to get underneath. Okay, the kid's angry, he's hit, he's done this, or she's done this. What would we like to understand more? What else can we do? What do we need to do? So it's just a bit of an example there of what we're doing. We've doubled, the next slide please, Em. We've doubled our residential care induction. Yeah, I won't go into it, all these, it's a complicated slide, but we train everybody for the past 4 years in therapeutic crisis intervention. So the sanctuary model is a bit of an overarching, you know, framework, an umbrella if you like, but under that we've embedded many other therapeutic techniques, and family therapy being one of them. Therapeutic crisis intervention is very much designed for residential carers to know how to diffuse conflict. It's experiential training, 3 or 4 days, and then top-ups. And that's what we do in those reflective practice sessions. But that's been really important to structure that much more and be pedantic, and that every worker, every carer has the right to be, before they hit the floor, to have done the shadow shifts properly, etc. You know, we're not perfect on any of this. We're a work in progress, yeah, but this is what we've got in place. Next step. We needed to have a really hard look at the systems thing. So next slide, sorry, Anne. So the next slide's really busy. You won't get to read it. I'm happy to send this around, but it's a snapshot of the, you know, executive summary, if you like, of our work, health and safety and wellbeing strategy. It's we've detailed, we report on our board. We've brought in matching tools. We've brought in, you know, our work, health and safety team go out to the homes and look and do inspections ourselves internally. We have the hazard identification. We've just really blitzed it and saying it's everybody's job to be on this, you know, mine and top down, bottom up. We've got behaviour support plans for all the kids. We do monthly reports. We've set up a residential care governance group. We triangulate the data. So we've got much more scientific and much more demanding actually of everybody to record and to think about what's going on, what's really going on. We've updated our procedures, we've updated our policies, we've tried to get with the AS 4801 requirements. We've looked at, we have set up the past couple of years quality steering committees in every area, and then in states that we come to as an executive to report on that. The same with the Resi governance group. So it's very important that we've I've just thrown in there some of the key strategies. Next slide, Em. Prevention first is the key position. You know, if we're going to interrupt those circles, we have to get better at prevention, and the key to that is planning. Prior planning prevents poor performance. So we need to know the hair on every kid's head. We need to know their history. What's happened to them is the key trauma-informed question, not what's wrong with them. Mental health tend to give us about 4 or 5 assessments, not a lot around what's happened to them often. So we need to be very curious and make sure that we're proactive with the department and with any other person who's ever done an assessment on the kid to pull it all together and read it and then make sense of it and then tweak our responses to that knowledge. This will all prevent violence. Okay, we need to all understand that some kids it's just an explosion, it's expressive, but for some kids it is planned, it is instrumental, because I want to get what I want to get, or I don't want to be here, and I know if I do this they'll you know, break down the placement. We need to have absolute appropriate oversight. Next one. So it's multiple and concurrent strategies, as the next slide says. You know, it's no one thing that's helped to improve, and we have improved, but we're not there yet. We're like everyone else, a work in progress. We have, you know, really been very clear about our practice standards. We've been much more focused on performance management. We've put in place a rigorous supervision structure that is recorded. We audit supervisors on that. It's not negotiable. Supervision is your main quality assurance and prevention strategy, but so is training, and so is the culture within every team. Next slide. Thanks, Emma. The next slide. So key quality and safety developments at MacKillop. So this is, you know, in terms of, I was asked to talk about what we've done over time. You know, we did a residential care review and commenced that really as soon after I came to MacKillop in 2017. We got Social Ventures Australia. We opened ourselves up and said, here's our data, here's what's happening. You know, let's hold ourselves accountable much more, critical reflection, what else can we do? That went on for months. We then started an EMDR pilot, eye movement desensitisation reprocessing, and that started in February 2018, and that was about responding differently and helping workers who'd been harmed, training people in that. We started the quarterly statewide resi care workshops off-site. We took everybody, caseworkers, residential carers, supervisors, therapeutic pracs, principal pracs, coordinators, managers, directors, all together, about 80 of us. And we went to Williamstown every quarter, and we just focused on this. COVID was a real sort of bummer on that. We had to stop it. But, you know, we did it, we connected electronically. We started the Outcomes 100, that deep dive case reviews. That started in May 2018, and we've kept going with it. We've got the governance review, so we had external people come in and look at all our policies and procedures, gave us feedback, and we've been on that improvement. Work Health and Safety have worked with us on a strategic intervention, and that was in place, I think, since 2015, 16. That was on foot when I came in. That ceased a couple of years later. The other thing to point out, there's the Residential Care Governance Group, all of exec taking much more responsibility on the detail. Throughout COVID-19, we've continued all of these. We didn't drop the ball. Next slide. I'm talking fast. But we've got here, we've got 41 homes. What have we focused on in the Resi Care Governance Group? The number of people in houses. We had a hypothesis that if there was instability, there'd be more incidents. That isn't always the case, can I say? Our deep dive reviews have shown that sometimes there's higher numbers because many of the kids, remember that earlier slide, 40% of them have a diagnosed disability. So some of them have a number of support workers who come into the home, which ups the numbers. We introduced therapeutic life story work. Next slide. Thanks, Em. And as well as that, the therapeutic life story work, this EMDR, now what does it do? We've actually worked with 100 frontline workers over the last 2 or 3 years. EMDR is only one of 2 therapies recommended by the World Health Organization. I trained in it in the early 90s as a therapist. I worked with it for 20 years. I know it works. It's not the silver bullet, but it's a really useful thing to have when you're treating PTSD. Police, AMBOs use it. You know, I said, we need to have resi carers have access to it. Now, we've got a very important 3-year evaluation that's just starting with Monash, MacKillop and the EMDR Academy. We have had, the next slide shows some nice results, but our numbers are very small. You'll see here the sample was 14 workers. That line going across is PTSD criteria. The green line is where our 14 workers were before the EMDR, and the yellow line is post. So we've got pre and post, and you can see the decrease in their distress, the PCL scores, which is their symptoms, if you like. So we're onto something with the EMDR, and that's made a difference. But it's not one thing. The biggest thing, I think, has been the visible leadership inside the homes, yeah, where we have coordinators, managers, much more hands-on, so that kids know that at MacKillop there's a strong ring of support. The other prevention and response strategies include healing matters, right? That's been a really important innovation, and we've embraced that the last 4 years and made every staff member, or at least 6 of them, have completed 6 modules, and we got some money for that at the end of last year from Monash, which was nice. But, you know, helping kids and staff to understand the importance of ritual, routine, consistency, and valuing recreation. So helping kids to have a better quality of care. Can't stress the importance of that enough. Therapeutic life story work. We've trained 20 of our staff over the past 3 years in the diploma with Richard Rose. We're now training all of our staff in All About Me, More About Me. Next one. And this, again, it helps kids to process the trauma. We've introduced pet-assisted therapy. And some kids in our homes have guinea pigs. One has a cat. Unfortunately, one of our staff was allergic, but, you know, we've had dogs, and we've got 7 dogs now that work with our schools and in our resi homes, just engaging kids differently to help them to process what they've been through. Next one. Family welcome pack. This has been big. Kids often are exploding and acting out because they are aching for that connection with their brother or their sister, or the system somehow hasn't worked cohesively enough, yeah, to think family. So, you know, Christmas, birthdays, Father's Day, Mother's Day are all times when you can predict that kids will become more anxious and more distressed because they feel stigmatised that they're the ones not at home. It's a very painful position our kids are in. So we do our best then to find somebody who the kids can connect with. Next slide, Em. The youth advisory groups, the voice of kids, really listening deeply to what the kids say. We do viewpoint surveys, but that's not enough. You know, we do those twice a year. We've got to be on the ground, you know, leaders having dinner with the kids, going out there, being visible. And, you know, that importance of having a sense of really respecting the voice and deep listening to kids and their families who know them best, usually. Next one. So in summary, we, you know, I've talked a lot about a range of things, but we did home makeovers on all of our homes, you know, subtle lighting at night, warm colours, groovy cups. You know, kids notice. They feel stigmatised being in care enough. Make it a beautiful place. Bring in colour. Make the furniture nice. And if something's broken, repair it straight away. You know, we do mental health first aid. We've had peer support, worker to worker if there's been an incident, and the greater return to work support. So I really want to acknowledge Claire Murphy and Roland and Nalini, our team, who do beautiful work with all our operational teams. The supervision template is really important, but the key domains, it has to be personal, workplace, and everything coordinated around the health system to get them back to work as well if staff have been injured. Next slide. We've made some progress on the return to work. I think Allianz gave us this data. So, you know, we've improved and relative, we're not doing too bad, but, you know, it's, as I repeat, we're a work in progress, and these injuries to our workers, I lose sleep over, and good people should, I think, because it's not okay. Again, it's back to relationships, and that strong employer-employee plays the critical role, and that open, trusting relationship where we actually ring them now, not just their supervisor, but the manager rings them if there's been an incident within 24 hours. So does the director, unless they say they don't want any more calls. Sometimes I'll go and see them. We actually wrap around. And that's really important, yeah? Because it's that peer support or feeling like it matters what happened to you on that shift and that you're not being blamed, you know? The people aren't coming in a blaming organisation, that we're open to supporting. Next one. And that hope and self-belief. So recovery at work is something we're talking more about. So we said, is there another way they can work at MacKillop without putting them back into that sort of high risk environment straight away? How do we do the repair work with that worker and the young person? The jargon is life space interviews. That comes from the therapeutic crisis intervention model. But, how do we do that restorative practice, that restorative justice, where we help kids to turn on empathy, actually, and start to grow their own conscience, so that even though, yep, shocking things have happened to them, yep, they've been victimised, but it doesn't give them the right to hurt other people. And that's our job, right? The moral development of these kids and helping them to have a sense of being able to process and start that healing so that our staff are safe. And the bottom line that we talk about all the time is sort of love bombing the kids so that we can actually establish, but also very clear boundaries around what's okay and what's not, and treating people how you want to be treated. So that positive workplace culture. I think I'm very out of time, but I think there's perhaps just one more and that's it, I think, for me. I had till 11, so I better finish. Em, is there another slide or that's it?
Just popping you onto your last slide. So that's your summary slide there, Robin.
Yeah, so, if you wanted to sum up this presentation, it's all about prevention. It's a whole of organisation. And in fact, we can't do it. We needed child protection. We needed the community of practice. So systemically, we have to make a difference, yeah? So it's prevention. MacKillop can't do that. No agency can do that on their own. We need the centre. We need WorkSafe. We need the department and many others. Immediate for our workers who are harmed, immediate and compassionate responses. And we need analysis and continuous improvement.
Thanks, Robin.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Wow, that was a lot of information to take on board. That was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I'm sure that people will get a lot of inspiration from all of that shared information. I think it's wonderful to hear that you feel that Victoria is leading reform in this space, and that we're working together as a community of practice. I think that resonates very strongly with us, and that relationship building and relationship practice is imperative. So thank you so much. I'd like to introduce you. We've got a couple of agents who we're rapt to have here with us today. So thank you very much, Brad and Joe, for making the time to come and talk to us. We want to talk about some WorkSafe offerings that can support organisations and of what's available and when to use it. We've chosen two today, and then I'm going to run through very briefly all of the others, but we wanted to go in depth with a couple of them. So Brad Chalmers, I'd like to introduce from Return to Work at CGU, and Brad's going to talk to you about mobile case management. So Brad, if you're ready.
Thank you, appreciate that, Josephine. So my name is Brad Chalmers. I'm part of the Return to Work team at CGU, and I'll be chatting about mobile case management, or MCM for short, and we'll talk about some of the benefits for employers. So I'll just start by providing you guys with some details on the roles and responsibilities of a mobile case manager and how they differ from a normal case manager. I'll talk a little bit about the skills and experience that makes them effective, explain the advantages that their support can provide for both employers and on claim outcomes, and then give you some ideas on when to get them involved and take you guys through a case study on the impact that it can have. And at the end of that, I'll give you guys the opportunity to ask any questions you have on mobile case management. The purpose of a mobile case manager is simply to bring workers, employers, and treating health practitioners together in a face-to-face setting where possible to support the claims experience, but in particular, the recovery and return to work process. So this face-to-face interaction is their primary and core function. That's really what their role revolves around. And it's in addition to the normal case manager that you have on a claim. So although at the moment we're limited in our ability to conduct face-to-face discussions due to some COVID restrictions, we have still been effectively utilising video conferencing wherever possible and still getting really good outcomes. But the goal is definitely to return to face-to-face interaction in the future where it's safe to do so. So all agents in Victoria have mobile case managers as part of their claims model, and their primary role is to undertake early identification and intervention on high-risk claims. So claims can be considered high risk based on a number of different reasons, such as a worker's capacity, the injury type, or even psychosocial risk flags that we might identify in our discussions with yourselves as employers or injured workers. And this is where we really encourage employers to ask about engaging a mobile case manager if they are concerned about a particular risk factor that they're aware of. So from there, once we identify a claim that might be, high risk, or there's something that we can do to support, a mobile case manager's role is to support the employers with any assistance they need in planning for return to work, which might include things like identifying duties or preparing return to work plans, or collaborating with treating health practitioners. A big part of this is also support the injured workers with their role in their own recovery, and also allow them to meet their obligations around return to work planning. So talking through that with both parties. So this is where the face-to-face discussions with key parties come together. And those key parties, again, are employers, injured workers, and the treating health practitioners. It's important to ensure all parties are on the same approach to support a recovery and return to work, and it makes sure agents can help facilitate those key strategies. The purpose of mobile case manager, I'll reiterate again, I guess, isn't to take away from an employer's right to communicate directly with the injured workers or treating health practitioners, but instead we want to support this by utilising our skills and experience in that process. So really want to partner with employers in helping to support that return to work after an injury has occurred and when they're off work and there's some high risk factors that we can help support. Yeah. So mobile case managers are experienced in personal injury management in the Victorian Workers' Compensation Scheme. So they all have a background in working in Victorian Workers' Compensation, and they have quite a fair bit of experience to understand and mitigate those return to work risk factors that we see on a day-to-day basis dealing with claims after an injury has happened and after they've ceased work as a result. And importantly, we're obviously there to help manage that on a day-to-day basis, but engage and influence treating health practitioners such as GPs, physios, psychologists, surgeons, or other specialists that they might be involved with. We also have case managers dedicated to both physical and mental injury claims to ensure they're specialised in dealing with unique barriers that those different injury types have. So it's really about getting someone who's really experienced in seeing those things day to day to help out and do that in a face-to-face setting. So there's some key benefits to engaging a mobile case manager as opposed to, for example, external supports. So as an agent resource, we're able to complete face-to-face visits from the moment we receive a claim without having to wait for an external provider to become involved. So things like occupational rehab provider, which legally we're required to wait for an injured worker to make their choice of external provider. Then we have to provide a referral to that external organisation. Then they have to organise their involvement. So that can take up valuable weeks at such a critical time at the beginning of the claim. So we certainly talked in our breakout group around that early intervention, and being able to do that from the day we receive a claim and start to deal with that is a very important factor. Mobile case managers are an additional support to the case management experience. So you always have your case manager aligned to a claim, and they'll still be there to support you with all aspects of the claim. But certainly the mobile case manager is there to support that additionally, and having them involved doesn't take away from an employer's right to consult with the worker or treater. But as I mentioned earlier, it allows us to have specialised face-to-face support where it's needed on those high-risk claims. Also, because a mobile case manager is an agent resource, so they're employed by the insurance company, they don't impact on claims costs. So subsequently, it's great for premiums and the bottom line. Getting them involved early to determine if there's other supports before we go down that line is a great way to do that in the face-to-face setting. Agents also undertake a number of initiatives to support return to work on high-risk claims, and mobile case managers are well placed to identify barriers on those claims that they complete face-to-face visits on, and then identify any suitable services that might assist. So it's a great way for us to help develop that strategy and that support process, is being able to engage in a face-to-face setting and really understand those barriers at a greater level. And ultimately, statistics show that improved return to work rates 3 months post a face-to-face visit when multiple parties are in attendance. So the most effective type of visit that we can undertake is when an employer, an injured worker, and a treating health practitioner are all in attendance, because it shows a greater level of support and accountability between all those parties that are there. So when to engage? So if we consider the role, skills, and benefits that we've just spoken about of mobile case management and conducting those face-to-face visits, we want to consider mobile case managers when we need support with planning for return to work. So we may be able to actually come out to your work sites or catch up virtually to go over some of the things that your organisation does, locations, those sorts of things, and identify any significant risk factors that there might actually be in that return to work. So things like, as we've spoken about in some of our breakout groups, possibly, particular sites that might be triggers or issues for that return to work. These risk factors from an employer perspective could be a lack of conflicting information about recovery, capacity or restrictions, and difficulty establishing return to work or treatment goals with treaters, relationship breakdowns between employers and injured workers, or any other situation that could benefit from some face-to-face support or collaboration. So we really want to help out in those situations where you guys need some extra support and getting that clarity around how we can support a worker back to work. It can also be undertaken as a precursor or concurrently with an external occupational rehab provider to support, to give continuity of support, I should say. So as it's a key target to intervene as early as possible. So if we're able to do that from the moment we receive a claim and identify other supports, we can then help hand that over to any external supports that we might need to engage as well. And so I just want to take you all through an example of where mobile case manager can be utilised. In this particular scenario, we'll look at how the mobile case manager can support employers and workers during the pending stages of claim, even if we don't know what that liability outcome will be. So, so bear with me. I'll try not to make it death by PowerPoint, as Robin mentioned earlier. But yeah, I'll take you through some of the key points of this particular case study and how this was important. So the worker in this scenario is a 30-year-old full-time employee who claimed for a right foot ankle injury due to work shoes and duties at work requiring to be on his feet constantly. So he had an ultrasound on his right ankle, which showed some tendinovitis, but also a degenerative condition. So following this, he ceased work on the 26th of September and then submitted his claim shortly after on the 1st of October. So the employer didn't dispute that he had an injury. They were aware of it, and he'd spoken about that, but they were concerned it might be pre-existing. He'd only been employed with them for a very short time, so the claim was pending for 28 days to investigate that liability as part of the legislation. So during this pending period, unfortunately, the employer was well aware of their role to support the worker. So with the support of a mobile case manager, we're able to get together and identify seated duties to accommodate the worker's injury, and provide a return to work plan to the worker and his podiatrist, all within the first week of the claim being received by the agent, and all while the eligibility officer was still undertaking their investigation into the claim's liability. So fortunately, the podiatrist reviewed that and endorsed the return to work plan on the 7th of October, again, only a week after receiving the claim, with the worker due to commence the following week, but he failed to return to work and he didn't get a certificate of capacity from his GP to reflect the return to work plan. So straight away, we were able to engage the mobile case manager and to work on understanding what the barriers were to a safe and sustainable return to work, because that was the big issue. So to achieve this, the mobile case manager arranged a case conference with the GP, the worker, and the employer, all in attendance on the 20th of October, to talk about that return to work. Again, all while the liability was still being reviewed. It's obviously quite important in this scenario because, regardless of what that liability outcome is, the best case scenario is for an injured worker to make a safe and sustainable return to work for their own health and outcomes, but also, for the positive impact on premiums. So during the case conference, the worker denied he had a capacity to undertake the proposed suitable duties, and he wanted to wait for a further MRI and treatment before returning to work out of fear of aggravation. But the mobile case manager was able to successfully talk through what those duties were with the GP and the worker, the nature of those, and that he already had the capacity within his already existing functional capacity for things he was doing at home. So the seated duties were able to demonstrate that he was doing those things already in his home environment. And we also noted that the podiatrist didn't believe it would cause aggravation and had already endorsed this, which the GP wasn't aware of. So the worker hadn't gone to the GP with that information. So based on this, the mobile case manager and the employer worked together to negotiate for the GP to endorse the return to work plan to commence and issue the worker with a capacity for suitable duties for the following week, which required a turnaround from the GP and the worker at the beginning of the conference, which was a great outcome. Ultimately, the claim wasn't accepted, which in the following week, but despite this, the worker still made a return to work on the 30th of October based on the graduated return to work plan, which he signed himself on the advice of his treaters. So There's a really great outcome to sort of demonstrate that although we're still looking into the liability of a claim, the support for a worker and an employer and that return to work planning can still exist in that space. And the mobile case manager role, which we'll talk through, obviously some great examples of that. So we'll jump to the next slide. So as I mentioned, it's a good example for a number of different reasons. So intervention in the early stages of a claim, even if it's not yet accepted, is still the most critical stage that determines return to work outcomes. And as we've spoken about, ideally we do prevention in regards to the claim being submitted to help workers return to work, or if they don't need to, if they don't have to, ceasing work in the first place. In this situation, the employer needed acute support with that return to work process, so they weren't overly experienced in identifying and drafting up a return to work plan, so we're able to support them with that. Again, another great example where the employer needed help negotiating that capacity and the return to work with the treating health practitioners. So they weren't comfortable in having that conversation or didn't know how to engage and structure that conversation. So we were able to support them with that in that face-to-face setting. And this is a great example of how we can partner with employers to get that important information across to those key parties and translate it into an outcome. And ultimately, it's a great impact from a premium point of view, being able to put a safe and sustainable return to work in place, regardless of that liability and whatever that outcome was. So, thank you all for listening and allowing me to take you through the case study. I'll open up to any questions you might have about mobile case management.
Thanks so much, Brad. That was very comprehensive. I think that was terrific. Given the time restraints that we're under today, if you have any questions from Brad, I'm sure that he'd be more than happy for you to contact him directly or send through an email either via the centre or WorkSafe or directly to Brad. And he
Absolutely.
can take you through any further details. So I'd just like to introduce you very quickly down to Jo Turner, who is lead in psychological services at Allianz, and she's going to take you through mental injury specialists. Thanks, Jo.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks, Brad. That was great. So hi, everyone. I am Joanne Turner, and I do manage our psychological injury programs at Allianz. And I want to talk to you a little more about how these mental health professional roles that we do have at the WorkCover agents actually operate, how they can be used and how they can best support you as well. So each agent is required to have a mental health professional or professionals in place. This is in order to make sure that we are providing that best level of service on any psychological or secondary psychological injury claims. Now, every agent or every WorkCover agent has a different structure around that or how they utilise those roles. But as I mentioned with Allianz, we have a small centralised team which I lead in terms of how we utilise or structure that. So what the role actually does provides, so a mental health professional will provide a specialist review and strategy on all accepted psychological injury claims. That means expertise and support for overcoming barriers, for example, on physical claims with secondary psychological component. It also means that we can provide those treater contacts on complex claims to better understand the actual diagnosis, the modality of treatment, and even try and look at what we can expect to see around recovery or some timeframes around recovery and what other support we might be able to actually put in place to best manage that. So it is about early intervention, even though I say that it's a requirement to have a strategy on all accepted psychological injury claims. It doesn't mean that that's the point that we get involved. We are involved quite early, so early intervention is the key in terms of that support that we can provide. So I'll talk to that a little bit more just on the next slide. So in terms of how can you expect that role, our role, to support you around those claims? And it is that early intervention support that we can provide. And that's both to the injured party or worker themselves. So it's that early contact with them to find out how they are, and that's regardless of where they are within that work cover process. Our role is purely about checking in on them and their well-being, whether they're actually receiving any appropriate treatment at that stage, if they're aware of what treatment they can actually access through their GP or a mental health care plan. And then it's about understanding and giving advice to all parties on managing a psychological injury. So contact with the employer to talk about what's happened with that person, what other things might be going on there in the background. So similar to what we discussed before, other barriers within the workplace, relationship issues, other things that are occurring or happening in the background, just to also give us a better picture of what's happening there so we can best advise and support you with managing that issue as well. Then we also can provide that expertise and influence, as I said, when communicating with treaters or that are involved on that claim or are treating that worker. So having a discussion to actually better understand what they're actually putting in place, what is the treatment plan, and can we just actually influence them in terms of thinking about some other broader programs that could assist there as well. Also, in terms of my role or a mental health professional's role at the agent, we also are aware of any other pilot programs or offerings that there might be within the community that we could be suggesting that might be appropriate as well. There's also that specialist MCM support. So like Brad was just talking about, the mobile case management support, it could also be a mental health professional from the agent that provides that support as well. So attends a GP or a psychologist appointment with the worker, or a workplace meeting involving the employer as well, to really help work through the barriers, but also be understanding the impact from a mental health perspective. So there is that focus on treatment and recovery timeframe. So that's really our specialty, to be able to focus on treatment, making sure that the worker is getting the most out of what can be provided or should be provided, and then really establishing a pathway to return to work, because as we know, returning to work is part of recovery. But we can't return to work without that appropriate focus first on getting the person well. So the other part, I guess, to the role, just moving to the next slide, is about building that capability as well. So my role also provides internal education to our claims teams. So it's helping and supporting anybody that's really working on those claims with having a better understanding of a mental health or mental injury or mental health condition, better understanding of common mental health diagnosis as well, and what that could mean, appropriate and reasonable treatment. So really, as I said earlier, just that focus around what is reasonable and appropriate at that stage, and is it matching the diagnosis also. Just that good communication around where things are at for the person, and making sure that there is somebody in touch with the worker all the way along. So as we know, there could be some other complexities and barriers there as to why perhaps the injured person isn't wanting to communicate with certain parties, but often then that's our role to be bridging that gap as well. And then obviously supporting a sustainable return to work outcome. So not just being involved to get them back to work, but then also ensuring that that remains sustainable as well. So thank you. that's mostly what I wanted to say on that topic. I've probably tried to rush it along a little bit, just aware of the time there, just in case there were questions as well.
Thank you so much, Jo. We really appreciate you being here today. I'm going to wrap up very, very quickly, given that we're running out of time. We will be sending, so Ollie, if you want to go to the next slide, we'll just flick through that. We're sending you a comprehensive list with all of the details of what WorkSafe can offer. So we'll send that document out to everybody. Have a look at those. It's got the detail and the descriptions on that. This slide, if you can see on when your slide pack, just tells you or gives you a suggestion as to when you might want to use some of those things. Deb, I'm going to hand to you now just to wrap up, and thank you everybody so much for presenting and for attending today.
Thank you, Josephine. Thank you so much. There are a few things I'd like to say. This has been a fantastic session, mature and sophisticated. And if you are interested in this area of work, this was the forum to be at, because it's been jam-packed full of really important information. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the work of the residential care workers in the organisations in the state of Victoria. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on a journey, and that it's a really important journey to improve occupational health and safety in residential care, and that the preventing of occupational violence and aggression is also about cultural change, and that violence isn't okay. I'd like to acknowledge that, you know, through the taking on this challenge with our partners in WorkSafe and DFFH is actually a bit of a gift. It's something we could have only dreamed of. Now, I know that sounds ridiculous, but actually we have got the opportunity here to change some things that have in a long-standing way been an issue for all of us. I'd like to also thank Robin Miller. I heard somebody say Robin's passion is just getting stronger and stronger, and I'd agree with that. Her presentation was brilliant and provided all sorts of strategies about what Robin is doing with MacKillop. So it was just fantastic to have that comprehensive presentation. Her honesty, but also her strategy and approach is to be commended. Also, there's a short survey after this that I mentioned at the beginning of the session that we'd really like you to fill in so that we know how we can cater for you in the future. I'd have to say, I know I wasn't in the breakout rooms, but I know they were fantastic because I could hear the feedback as I was coming back into the session. So I'm glad that they were a place where people could spend some time and talk about what was working, what wasn't working, and what we need to do. I want to acknowledge that these sorts of sessions mean that our rural and regional colleagues can much more easily participate, and I know a lot of you were here today. I must say there was a clear statement, particularly for those organisations operating residential care, that not having a system where all residential care is therapeutic is a problem and something that will need to be addressed as we go through this process of addressing occupational violence and aggression. I just want to say thank you to my team. Thank you to Emma, to Oliver, to Josephine, to Emily for being here today. And I just want to say they do a lot of work behind the scenes to make these things run smoothly. It looks easy, it is not easy, and I just want to say a heartfelt thank you to all of you for setting this up for success. So look, have a good rest of the week, and you will be hearing a lot more from us over the coming weeks and months as we start to address the problem that's before us, which is occupational violence and aggression against residential care workers. Thank you so much.